Our gold is not the ordinary gold. That is a saying from Muhammad ibn Umail, alchemist. Today, we're going to talk about technical Hermeticism, alchemy. There's sometimes a distinction made between philosophical Hermeticism, which has been the kind that we've been over in these videos, and then the more technical branch, alchemy. There's a little bit of overlap, and in some cases, the distinction really blurs, so it's not hard and fast. But maybe the main difference is that the technical Hermeticism, which is philosophical too, by the way, spends more time on metaphors of operations and images of procedures, especially alchemically. So let's get into alchemy a little bit. And I have some quotations from some short ones right from the alchemical literature itself for you. So first of all, alchemy, what the heck is it? Alchemy is usually defined as an attempt to transmute lead into gold. There were some alchemists who were interested in that, particularly in the Middle Ages, but that doesn't even come close to capturing alchemy's true nature. Alchemy is really a wisdom tradition. It's part of Hermeticism. And when alchemy was done originally, way back in Egypt, it was done both for scientific purposes and for spiritual purposes. There was no distinction between the two. So we can't reduce alchemy to pure spirit or psychology on the one hand and pure science on the other. That distinction did not exist for the alchemists themselves, even some of the later ones. So the idea is all built around the idea of transmutation. So Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a Jungian analyst, refers to embalming procedures in Egypt as the beginnings of alchemy. A little more to it than that. So current scholarship thinks that alchemy begins in the workshops of Egyptians who were dyeing statues and making those marvelous polychromatic creations of theirs. It was sacred art. And for them, transmutation didn't mean changing something completely in the sense of changing its physical characteristics. It meant changing its color. So right from the beginning, alchemy and color change are intimately linked. So that's important to understand. Transmutation means changing color. Another thing about this is the idea of the philosopher's stone first occurs in one of the earliest alchemists from whom we have any writing, and that was Zosimos of Panopolis. And he talks a little bit about the philosopher's stone, but he does it in such a way that it sounds as though anything that you treat alchemically is its own kind of philosopher's stone, its own source of spiritual insights. And so from his work forward, gradually there comes into being this idea, this myth really, of a fabulous stone. Some people said it was a liquid instead of a stone that would grant long life and change illness into health and change glass into gems and base metals into gold and silver. So let me give you an overview. This is simplified of what the process seems to be, especially as it heads on up from its Egyptian origins into the Middle Ages. And I should just acknowledge here, my own familiarity is primarily with Western alchemy. I don't know other kinds of alchemy that well, but there are also traditions in other cultures, including China, that go way back. So that's something to be aware of, particularly Taoist alchemy. So the way this works in general is you take a lump of something called prime matter. And the name for this goes back to Aristotle. The roots go back further. And so the question that a lot of alchemists ask is, what is prime matter? And, you know, there's as many ideas about this as there are alchemists. And one idea that recurs frequently is that prime matter is visible to everyone, but no one sees it. So it's not found in temples or on mountaintops, but in the filth, as the alchemists often put it. It's found in the darkness and the shadows. And this is why Jung made the psychological move of saying prime matter psychologically is an issue that's being triggered. It's a complex or a conflict that's happening. That's where we start. And there's some kind of gold in it. There's some kind of meaning or message in the complex that we need to excavate. And so if you had a chunk of prime matter, you would subject it to various operations that amount to splitting it into its elements, which in the West were the not 4, but 5 traditional elements, including ether. And then you would do various operations on the different elements, and then you would bring them all back together, and that would be the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. And so a key theme that hovers over all this that became an alchemical saying is dissolve and coagulate. So in other words, render it down, dissolve, fragment, destroy, and then bring it back together in a new form. So that is the basic form of alchemy. And you'll sometimes see things that say, these are the 7 key steps of alchemy, or these are the 9 operations of alchemy, or whatever. And you have to realize that when you read actual alchemical manuscripts, which are Hermetic documents, they're part of the Hermetica, the steps vary widely. And sometimes you have to go back to previous steps. So in general, you begin in the blackness and the darkness with the prime matter, and blackening is an alchemical stage. And then you move to into a whitening or purifying of some kind as an overall stage, and there's different operations for that. And then some would say that the material yellows or either becomes solar or sickens, depending on how you hold that, or both. And then the reddening that announces the production of the stone. But the steps vary widely. There's no systematic set of steps for doing alchemical work. So I mentioned Zosimos. Here's him talking. All things are brought together and all things are dissolved again. For nature, turned toward itself, transforms itself. So alchemy in many ways was an attempt to have a different kind of relationship with nature. And there's also procedures that go along with it that I won't go into here, but there's certain proficiencies that Zosimos and other alchemists said that we all need to have to do this work with nature. So prayer is one. Astrological knowledge, doing things at the right time in the right way, is another. Also what the alchemists called vera imaginatio, which is true imagination, the ability to hold the work in imagination and see it mutate there. So imagination, as with all Hermeticism, was not just a step or a stage or a skill, but integral to all the work. Zosimos said, you have to learn the chemicals. If you're going to work scientifically, you need the tools, right? It's not just speculative. You have to know what you're doing. And then lots of study. You know, what have other people said about these things? What's the wisdom tradition involved and all that, right? So as Islamic alchemists like to put it, one book opens another. So if you're somebody who loves to read, you'll notice that you start with one and then there's 10 or 20 after that, you know. So the idea that alchemy is a form of seeking gold fails to distinguish between opportunists, and there were some who called themselves alchemists, and those who were really on the Hermetic path. So I have a couple of quotations that speak to this, that refute that idea that alchemy is just about gold making. So at one point, the Turba Philosophorum, which is a key alchemical text with Islamic roots, says, our gum, therefore, meaning a substance that's an integral part of the alchemical work. Our gum, therefore, is for philosophers more precious and more sublime than pearls. And the same document also says that know ye that our gum is stronger than gold and more honorable than gold. Philip Agabella says, therefore, I affirm that the universal medicine for bodies is the philosophic gold, after it has been separated and drawn into the highest state of perfection. Our common gold has absolutely nothing in common with the philosophical gold we use to begin our task. In that respect, common gold is dead and clearly useless. And then one more from Thomas Vaughan. By gold, I mean our green gold, not the adored lump, which is dead and ineffectual. So there's been an attempt to repeat alchemical operations that appear in the technical literature. And we shouldn't be surprised that some of them actually do real chemistry, because that was part of it. Chemistry wasn't separated from alchemy as a wisdom path. So we can't reduce alchemy to chemistry. And here's some quotations that speak to that. The stone of the wise is achieved through the way of the greening of nature. That's from the Splendor Solace. Give what thou hast of the one, with a capital O, back to the one. That's very hermetic. That's also from Thomas Vaughan, by the way. And then this is even more mysterious in some ways. If you do not render the corporeal substances non-corporeal, and vice versa, and if the two are not made one, nothing will be achieved. And that's Maria Propetissa, who is one of the earliest alchemists on record in the Western tradition. You have to blend the corporeal and the incorporeal, the imaginal and the physical, the spiritual and the concrete in order to do the work. Maria Propetissa. A couple more along similar lines. So in Canon 13 of the Basilian Aphorisms, it says, nature is a certain medium between the higher and lower world, to be found everywhere, by both the poor and the rich alike, as all philosophers attest. It is thrown into the streets and trampled underfoot, and yet it is the foundation of admirable operations, the Basilian Aphorisms. And then the last one is an ancient alchemical saying that warns against materialism. Beware of the physical in the material. Beware of the physical in the material. Now, Carl Jung has rightfully been given credit for recognizing the deep psychological aspects of alchemy and therefore updating it to some extent. He received a lot of his alchemical materials from Marie-Louise von Franz, who was his research partner. And she went all over Europe gathering old manuscripts for him. And as valuable as that contribution was, sometimes it crosses the line into psychologism. And Jung actually says a few times that alchemy basically is projected psychology. The alchemists working on their materials in their bubbling vats were projecting their psychology into them and seeing that the materials spoke to them and were alive to them because of projection, which is a reductive move. It deanimates the work, actually. So let me give you a couple of quotations from the alchemists themselves that disagree with that interpretation. The stone is made in the image of the creation of the world. It's way bigger than the psyche, right? Here's another one. This is from the tomb of Semiramis, so this goes back a way. You ought to know concerning the quintessence, the goal of the work, that it is not a matter little and small, lodged and harbored, that it is a matter, little and small, lodged and harbored in some tree, herb, stone, or the like. In other words, it's the quintessence is in nature. It's out there somewhere, right? Not just in here. The primary matter of man and the primary matter of the great world are one and the same thing. That's from the alchemist Alexander von Suchten, 16th century. And then finally, there's an alchemical saying, the greater part of the soul is outside the body. So in the next video, we're going to talk a bit about parapsychology and how we study exactly that, how the things of the world get into us, but also how what we think of as internal moods and dreams and inner processes reflect what's happening outside ourselves as well. And bear in mind the Hermetic philosophical teaching that the world is inspirited and ensouled. It's not just us. So I mentioned earlier the blackening stage, and I have a couple of quotations that speak well to that. The alchemist generally said that when you're in those dark places, that part of you should rejoice because it's the beginning of the work. So Kirchweger, the alchemist, says, decay is a wonderful smith. Decay is a wonderful smith. I think those of us who compost would agree with that. Going back to Muhammad ibn Umayl, the alchemist, you will still be tired as long as your stone is black. So there needs to be a point where we go beyond decay and we go beyond the darkness. And also that comes up in the Secret Book of John, also known as the Apocryphon of John, which is a Gnostic document. When the light of Sophia had mixed with the darkness, it caused the darkness to shine. So the Opus, the great work of alchemy, begins in difficulty, and there are stages that are difficult, but it ends in triumph. And I like to think that in line with Hermeticism itself, that what the alchemists were looking for was a different and deeper and more intimate way to relate to the natural world. There was so much in the past, especially in the worldviews of the big religions, the big monotheisms, that was otherworldly, that discounted the world that we live in. And alchemy seems to be a response to that, and by saying, no, the sacred is here too. And we can get a sense of it if we explore matter. So I think that was actually their underlying project, not to do what they called psychology, although there was arguably a big psychological dimension to all of this too, which Jung has illuminated in his work. So I wanted to include a little quotation that's ascribed to the Philosopher's Stone itself speaking. And this is in Theoria Philosophiae Hermeticae, and the stone says of itself, "The egg of nature they call me, known to all the philosophers. Quicksilver or mercury fine am I called. An old dragon, an old man, I am everywhere near and far. Fly away unless one binds me with a measure. I have much of form, color, and shape. I carry in me the force of men and women." And that's the prime matter talking about itself. So in terms of reenchanting how we relate to the world, I have a couple of quotations for that too. Count Trevisan is an alchemist who says, "It appears then that this stone is a vegetable, as it were, the sweet spirit that proceeds from the bud of the vine." So it reminds me of Sir Isaac Newton saying he was searching for the great vegetative principle, by which he meant that factor that animates matter itself, and therefore the entire cosmos too. Archibald Cochrane says, "A garden which has been neglected for years and is overgrown with weeds, when taken over by an intelligent human being who will work hand in hand with nature, may once again become a thing of beauty and joy." And he refers to this as the perfection of the art. And then the Rosarium Philosophorum, which is a document that Jung spent a lot of time with, says, "You should employ venerable nature, because from her and through her and in her is our art born, and it is not else. And so our magisterium is the work of nature and not of the worker." And finally, let me wrap up by giving you a few that deal with this sense of as above, so below, which is not just an alchemical saying, but a Hermetic one that goes back to ancient Egypt, about everything being not just interconnected, but soulfully, vitally interconnected. So a few about that. When you have water from earth, air from water, the fire from air, and the earth from fire, then you have the art in all its fullness and perfection. That's from Aurora Conservans. This is, the next one is Gerhard Dorn, who is a 16th century Christian alchemist. "Turn yourselves into living philosophical stones." And the next two are people who aren't technically alchemists, but get to the same place. So air, soil, water, fire, those are words. And that's Walt Whitman from Song of the Rolling Earth. And then this last one is from Jung. The alchemists thought that the opus, the great work, the opus demanded not only laboratory work, the reading of books, meditation, and patience, but also love.